The cruiser's stale air conditioning hummed, a familiar backdrop to the late-night patrol. Officer Jake Riley gripped the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the deserted streets of downtown. The city, usually a vibrant mosaic of light and sound, lay cloaked in a rare, unsettling quiet. It was just after midnight, a time when the underbelly of Metropolitan City often stirred. But tonight, only the distant throb of a bass line from a hidden club broke the silence. Jake was a good cop, solid and reliable. His face, etched with a quiet intensity, belied the turmoil beneath. 32 years old, with sharp, observant eyes that had seen too much. He carried a weight that few of his colleagues understood. A personal tragedy, a wound still fresh, had driven him into law enforcement. A desperate quest for answers and a fragile hope for justice. He sought order in a world that had once been ripped apart by chaos. A flicker of movement in his rearview mirror caught his attention. A sleek, black sedan, moving too fast for the empty streets, swerved through a yellow light at the intersection of Grand Avenue and Market Street. Routine traffic stop. His training kicked in, a comforting muscle memory. He flipped on his lights, the blue and red strobing against the urban darkness, and watched the sedan pull over smoothly to the curb. He approached the vehicle, his hand resting instinctively on his sidearm, a standard procedure. The car windows were tinted, offering no glimpse of the driver. As he reached the driver's side, the window hummed down, revealing a woman. She was strikingly beautiful, even in the dim glow of the streetlights. Her hair, the color of midnight, cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that was both delicate and sharp, with high cheekbones and eyes that held a peculiar, unsettling depth. She looked to be in her late 20s, her expression calm, almost detached. "Good evening, ma'am," Jake began, his voice professional, devoid of inflection. "Officer Riley, Metropolitan City Police Department. Do you know why I pulled you over?" Her voice was low, melodic, with a subtle, almost imperceptible huskiness. "I believe I may have accelerated too quickly through the intersection." "Officer?" Her honesty was disarming, a stark contrast to the usual excuses he heard. "Indeed," Jake replied, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing. His eyes briefly fell upon her left wrist, which rested casually on the steering wheel. Her sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing a flash of skin. And then he saw it. It was a small tattoo, subtly placed on the inner curve of her wrist, just above the pulse point. A series of interlocking symbols, delicate yet distinct. A stylized black cross superimposed over a broken circle, with 3 tiny, almost invisible red triangles forming a constellation beneath it. Jake's breath hitched. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold, hollow. His hands, resting on the patrol car's doorframe, clenched involuntarily, his knuckles turning white. The hum of the street, the distant city sounds, all faded into a dull roar in his ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He knew that tattoo. He knew it with a chilling, visceral certainty that plunged him back into the darkest corners of his memory. It was the mark of the Crimson Hand, a shadowy, ruthless criminal organization that had terrorized Metropolitan City a decade ago. A group so secretive, so brutal, that their existence was almost mythological, whispered only in hushed tones by those who had encountered their wrath. And it was the same symbol that had been carved into the oak door of his family home, just hours before the fire that had consumed everything he loved. His parents, his younger sister, Lily, gone, reduced to ash and painful memories. The official investigation had concluded it was a random act of arson, a tragic byproduct of street violence. But Jake had always known better. He had found the symbol, half burned, on a discarded piece of wood in the rubble. He had spent years chasing ghosts, piecing together fragments of information, obsessed with the elusive Crimson Hand. He had joined the police force not just for justice, but for answers, for retribution. And now, here it was, on the wrist of a beautiful, calm woman in a black sedan, under the flickering streetlights of a quiet city night. He forced himself to breathe, to regain his composure. The woman was watching him, her deep eyes observant, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Had she noticed his reaction? His sudden, raw fear. "Officer," she prompted, her voice soft. but with an underlying sharpness that suggested impatience. "Is there a problem?" Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had to be careful. One wrong move, one flicker of recognition, and he could be dead. Or worse. He could jeopardize the entire, fragile investigation he had been building for years. He had no evidence, only a gut feeling, a chilling connection to his past. "No, ma'am," he managed to say, his voice strained. He forced a professional demeanor, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "License and registration, please." She retrieved the documents from her glove compartment, her movements fluid, graceful. Her sleeve remained subtly pulled up, the tattoo a dark, ominous brand against her pale skin. Jake's eyes flickered to it again, confirming what his mind already screamed. This was no coincidence. He took the documents, his fingers brushing hers. Her skin was cool, smooth. He retreated to his patrol car, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear, yes, a primal, bone-deep terror. But beneath it, a surge of raw, unbridled fury. After 10 years, the monster that had stolen his family had finally shown itself. He ran her license through the system. Lena Volkov, no criminal record, clean as a whistle, which, in Jake's experience, often meant precisely the opposite. The Crimson Hand was known for its meticulousness, for operating in the shadows, leaving no traces. This woman, Lena Volkov, was too polished, too calm, too clean. He returned to her vehicle, his voice now devoid of its initial professionalism, replaced by a cold, controlled tone. "Ms. Volkov, your registration is for a different vehicle. This sedan is registered to a shell corporation in Delaware." Lena's expression remained unperturbed. "My apologies, officer. It's a company vehicle. I was simply driving it for a work assignment. The paperwork must be with the company dispatcher." Her eyes met his, unwavering, almost challenging. Jake narrowed his eyes. She was good, too good. Her composure was chilling. "And the tattoo, Ms. Volkov?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper, leaning closer to the window. He ignored every protocol, every rule about direct confrontation. He had to know. He had to see her reaction. "That mark on your wrist? Does it mean anything to you?" Her eyes, which had been calm, flickered for a fraction of a second. A subtle hardening, a fleeting shadow of something dangerous. Her lips, previously relaxed, tightened almost imperceptibly. It was barely noticeable. A micro-expression that only someone looking for it, someone who knew what they were looking for, would catch. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. Her gaze was steady, even slightly amused. "Officer, are you suggesting I'm involved in some kind of secret society based on a tattoo? It's simply a design I liked, an abstract symbol." Her voice was laced with an innocent disbelief, a subtle hint of mock offense. "Perhaps you've been watching too many crime shows." Jake knew she was lying. He felt it in his bones. The almost imperceptible flicker in her eyes, the tightening of her lips, the subtle shift in her posture. It was all there, confirmation of his deepest fears. This woman was connected, directly connected. "Have a good night." "Ms. Volkov," Jake said, his voice flat, retreating from the car. He handed back her documents, his fingers brushing hers again. He felt a cold dread, but also a surge of fierce determination. He had found a lead, a tangible link to his past. As he walked back to his patrol car, Lena Volkov's engine purred to life. She didn't speed away, didn't show any signs of panic. She simply drove off, slowly, smoothly, disappearing into the city's quiet night. Her controlled exit was almost more unsettling than a frantic escape. Jake sat in his cruiser, the silence now deafening. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He needed to talk to someone he could trust, someone who understood the dark undercurrents of Metropolitan City. His old mentor, Detective Sarah Jenkins, who had retired years ago, a casualty of the very corruption Jake now found himself facing. She had been the only one who had ever truly listened to his theories about the Crimson Hand. He knew this was bigger than a traffic violation. This was personal. This was the opening he had been waiting for. The hunt had just begun. The monster that had destroyed his family was real, and it had a face. And that face belonged to Lena Volkov, the woman with the black cross and red triangles on her wrist. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a burning, unquenchable desire for justice. The chilling image of the black cross and 3 red triangles branded into Lena Volkov's wrist seared itself into Jake Riley's mind. The city outside his patrol car seemed to hum with a new, sinister energy, the kind that had been dormant for a decade. He drove, not on routine patrol, but with a singular, desperate purpose. His hands, still gripping the steering wheel, twitched with a nervous energy that had been absent for years. The calm facade he presented to the world shattered, revealing the raw, unhealed wound beneath. 10 years, 10 long years since the night his world imploded. The smell of smoke and fear still clung to his memory like a shroud. The screams, muffled by the roaring flames, haunted his nightmares. His parents, pillars of their community, gone. His little sister, Lily, a bright, innocent light, extinguished too soon. The official report had called it a tragic accident, a rogue arsonist in the decaying East District. But Jake knew. He had seen the symbol, crude yet unmistakable, spray-painted on a fence post near the smoldering ruins. The black cross, the 3 triangles, the mark of the Crimson Hand. He had dedicated his life to this. Every police academy drill, every late-night shift, every solved case, it was all a step towards this moment. He had meticulously collected every scrap of information, every rumor, every dismissed tip about the Crimson Hand. The organization was said to be a myth, a boogeyman story whispered by the city's criminal element. Yet Jake knew its reality, its devastating touch. They were believed to be a clandestine group, operating in the shadows, rumored to be involved in high-stakes illicit trades and brutal enforcement, leaving behind only whispers and fear. But then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, leaving behind a power vacuum in a city eager to forget. Jake pulled his cruiser into a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the precinct. He needed coffee, strong and black, and a quiet moment to gather his thoughts. More importantly, he needed to make a call. He pulled out his personal phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name Sarah Jenkins, his old mentor, a detective who had taken him under her wing during his early days, a woman who had seen the darkness in Metropolitan City and battled it relentlessly. She had retired years ago, a casualty of the very system Jake now suspected was still compromised. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. The phone rang twice before a gruff, tired voice answered. "Jenkins. Detective Jenkins, it's Jake Riley." A pause. "Riley, well, haven't heard from you in a while. What's eating you at?" "What time is it?" 2 in the morning. "I found something, Detective," Jake said, his voice low, urgent. "A tattoo, black cross, 3 red triangles." Silence on the other end, long and heavy. Then, Sarah's voice, now sharp, alert, every trace of sleepiness gone. "Say that again." "Riley." Slowly. Jake repeated the description. He could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Where did you see this?" "Jake," she asked, her voice a clipped whisper. "Tonight, traffic stop. A woman, Lena Volkov, mid-20s, black sedan, no record, but something about her. Sarah. She was too calm, too collected." "Lena Volkov," Sarah murmured, the name already being etched into her prodigious memory. "Describe the tattoo precisely. Location, size." Jake gave her the details. "All right, Jake. You need to understand something. The Crimson Hand was never truly gone. They just went deeper underground. They changed their skin. What you saw, it's a high-ranking mark. Not just a foot soldier." Jake's stomach tightened. A high-ranking mark. This was bigger than he dared to hope. "What do you know about them now?" Sarah. "Not much. Bits and pieces from my old contacts. Whispers. They've become incredibly sophisticated. They moved into legitimate fronts, powerful connections, city hall, high finance, even whispers within the justice system itself. They're like a phantom limb. You feel the pain, but you can't see the source. She paused. Why are you calling me? Jake, this isn't just a hunch for you. Is it? It's about my family. Sarah. Jake confessed. The words raw, tearing at the old wound. The fire. The symbol. I know it was them. They were behind it. They were sending a message. Sarah sighed, a sound heavy with sympathy and grim understanding. I always suspected... Jake? The official report never sat right with me. The way they shut down the investigation so quickly. It stank. She was silent for a moment. Look, Jake, you need to be extremely careful. If the Crimson Hand is truly active again, and this woman is indeed one of their high-level operatives, you've stumbled onto something lethal. They don't leave witnesses, and they don't forgive perceived threats. I understand, Jake said, his resolve hardening. I need to know more. I need to find out why they marked my family, and who is truly pulling the strings now. All right, Sarah conceded, a fierce determination entering her voice. This isn't official. I'm retired. You're a cop. This goes sideways. You're on your own. But I'll help you. I still have some eyes and ears in places the brass wouldn't expect. I'll dig into Lena Volkov, and I'll see what I can find about any resurgence of the Crimson Hand activities. Thank you, Sarah, Jake said, a genuine relief washing over him. He was no longer alone in this. The next few days were a blur of meticulous, covert investigation. Jake used his position as a patrol officer as a cover, subtly rerouting his routes, spending more time in areas Lena Volkov frequented, based on the information he got from Sarah. He ran every possible database query, every obscure lead he could think of, trying to find any connection to the Crimson Hand. He spent hours in the precinct archives, poring over cold cases from a decade ago, looking for other incidents with the same telltale mark. He found a series of unexplained disappearances of journalists who had been investigating organized crime. A brutal, unsolved murder of a mid-level politician who had been pushing for transparency in city contracts. Each incident had been quietly closed, dismissed as random acts of violence or runaways. But to Jake, they now formed a chilling pattern, a bloody trail leading directly back to the Crimson Hand. He also began to observe Lena Volkov. He staked out her reported address, a pristine, modern penthouse apartment in a high-security building. She moved with an unsettling grace, always alone, always detached. He saw her frequenting upscale galleries, exclusive restaurants, and high-stakes charity events, rubbing shoulders with the city's elite. She was integrated, unseen, a spider weaving her web in plain sight. Sarah Jenkins called him frequently, her voice low and guarded. She had dug up more on Lena Volkov. Lena was a rising star in a major investment firm, Sterling Capital Group, a company with deep ties to city development projects. She was known for her sharp intellect and ruthless business acumen. More unsettlingly, Sarah uncovered old, unconfirmed rumors linking Sterling Capital Group to shady offshore accounts and illicit financial dealings. Whispers that had always been dismissed as unsubstantiated. Jake, Sarah's voice crackled through the encrypted line one evening. I found something disturbing. Sterling Capital Group was instrumental in pushing through the redevelopment plan for the old waterfront district a few years back. There were massive payoffs involved, rumored corruption, but nothing was ever proven. The waterfront project, Jake mused. He remembered the controversy. A prime piece of land, suddenly acquired by a shadowy conglomerate, built into luxury condos and a private marina. It had always felt wrong. And guess who owned the construction company that got the main contract? Sarah's voice was grim. A shell company called Blackwood Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. Impossible to trace, but the key players. They had ties to a few individuals who were loosely linked to the old Crimson Hand investigations. Jake's blood ran cold. The web was far more intricate than he had imagined. The Crimson Hand wasn't just a street gang. They were deeply embedded, manipulating the city's infrastructure, controlling its very development. One night, while observing Lena, Jake saw her meet with a man in a discreet, expensive restaurant. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with an air of immense power. Jake recognized him immediately from old news clippings and public appearances. It was Councilman Arthur Thorne, a formidable political figure, a leading voice in metropolitan city politics, known for his stern demeanor and seemingly unblemished reputation. Thorne was a man revered by many, a symbol of stability and progress. Jake's gut twisted. Thorne. Could he be involved? The idea was almost unthinkable, but then he remembered Sarah's warning they had Len into the highest ranks. As Lena and Thorne spoke, their conversation was too muffled to hear, but Jake watched their body language. Lena was deferential, but not submissive. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared secret. Thorne, usually aloof and distant in public, leaned in, his expression intense. At one point, Lena subtly moved her hand, and Jake caught a glimpse of the tattoo on her wrist. Thorne's eyes flickered to it for a fraction of a second, a fleeting, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Jake felt a cold dread settle over him. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a direct, irrefutable link. The Crimson Hand was alive and well, operating at the highest levels of Metropolitan City, with Councilman Arthur Thorne seemingly at its core. He returned to his lonely apartment, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He contacted Sarah, relaying his observations about Thorne. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Thorne, Jake, are you sure he's untouchable? A golden boy. He's been eyeing the mayor's office for years. I'm sure, Sarah. I saw the tattoo, and the way they interacted. It was undeniable. This changes everything, Jake, Sarah said, her voice grim. If Thorne is involved, this isn't just a criminal organization. This is a shadow government. You're poking a hornet's nest with a very short stick. Your life is in extreme danger. And if you're right, then the fire, your family, it wasn't random. It was a message, a brutal warning. Jake already knew. The realization, though agonizing, brought a grim sense of clarity. His family wasn't just a random casualty. They were victims of a ruthless power play. His personal tragedy was inextricably linked to the city's deepest, darkest secrets. The investigation was no longer just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about exposing a web of deceit that ran from the city's underbelly to its most prestigious offices. And Lena Volkov, the woman with the tattoo, was a key, a direct link to the truth he had desperately sought for a decade. The hunt had escalated, and Jake knew he had to be ready to risk everything. The revelation of Councilman Arthur Thorne's connection to Lena Volkov and the Crimson Hand sent a tremor through Jake Riley's core. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were now snapping into place with chilling precision. The city he served, the system he had sworn to uphold, was rotten to its core, infested by a shadow organization that reached into the highest echelons of power. His personal quest for vengeance had just become a desperate battle for the soul of Metropolitan City. Jake knew he couldn't bring this to his superiors. Not yet. His suspicions, while deeply held and supported by Sarah Jenkins's covert intelligence, would be dismissed as a vendetta, fueled by his family's tragedy. Thorne was untouchable, a man woven into the fabric of the city's power structure. He needed irrefutable evidence, something that would tear down Thorne's carefully constructed facade and expose the Crimson Hand's true reach. He started digging deeper, operating entirely off the books, using his off-duty hours and leveraging his network of street informants, the kind of contacts official police procedures rarely acknowledged. He focused on Sterling Capital Group, Lena Volkov's employer. He scrutinized their public records, their corporate filings, looking for anomalies, for the financial breadcrumbs that would lead him to the heart of the Crimson Hand's operations. His investigation led him down a rabbit hole of shell companies, offshore accounts, and complex real estate dealings. Sterling Capital Group was a legitimate front, but Jake suspected it was being used to launder vast sums of illicit money, likely from the Crimson Hand's various criminal enterprises. He traced a series of large, unexplained transfers from Sterling Capital to a series of seemingly innocuous nonprofit organizations, which in turn routed funds to obscure development projects across the city. One particular project caught his eye, the Metropolitan Renaissance Initiative, a massive urban renewal program spearheaded by Councilman Thorne himself. The initiative was Thorne's pet project, lauded by the media as a beacon of progress, revitalizing forgotten districts. But Jake now saw it through a different lens, a perfect vehicle for corruption, a way to funnel illicit funds and expand the Crimson Hand's influence under the guise of public good. The land acquisitions, the construction contracts, the zoning changes, it all seemed to flow through Thorne's office. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins, working her own discreet channels, uncovered more about the Crimson Hand's historical operations. She confirmed their involvement in the disappearances of journalists and the murder of the politician Jake had found in the archives. Each victim had been investigating some aspect of corruption related to large-scale urban development or financial schemes that bore the Crimson Hand's distinctive, subtle signature. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. Anyone who threatened their silent expansion was eliminated. They operate like a virus. Jake. Sarah explained one evening, her voice grim over a secure burner phone. They infiltrate, they corrupt, and they grow. They don't leave overt trails. They erase them. And they use legitimate channels to mask their illicit activities. So, Sterling Capital is their financial arm, and Thorne is their political muscle. Jake summarized, a cold clarity settling over him. Precisely, Sarah confirmed. And Lena Volkov. She's not just an operative, Jake. She's too high up to be a simple runner. She's either a key strategist or someone with intimate knowledge of their internal workings. Possibly both. Jake continued his surveillance of Lena. He learned her routines, her habits, the subtle nuances of her guarded life. He observed her meetings, the hushed conversations in dimly lit cafes, the clandestine handoffs in bustling public parks. He noticed that she often met with men in expensive suits, their faces vaguely familiar from news articles about city politics and finance. They were all threads in the same tangled web. One afternoon, while staking out Sterling Capital's headquarters, Jake saw Lena leaving the building, her expression unusually grim. She moved quickly, her usual composure replaced by a subtle urgency. She got into a black car, not her sleek sedan, but a more discreet, unassuming model, and drove to a remote, abandoned warehouse district on the city's industrial fringe. This was unusual. Lena never strayed from the city's affluent core. Jake followed, keeping a safe distance, his heart pounding with anticipation. The warehouse district was desolate, a graveyard of forgotten industries, its rusty corrugated iron sheds casting long, skeletal shadows in the fading afternoon light. Lena pulled into a nondescript warehouse, its windows boarded up, its facade crumbling. She entered through a side door, which then clanged shut behind her, sealing her in. Jake knew this was a critical moment. This wasn't a legitimate business meeting. This was something else. This was the heart of the beast. He waited, hidden in the shadows, observing the warehouse. No other cars came or went. No guards were visible. It was too quiet, too still. He felt a prickle of unease. This was a trap, or a highly secure clandestine meeting. Either way, it was dangerous. He cautiously approached the warehouse, moving like a phantom through the rusted machinery and overgrown weeds. He found a small, unsecured window, partially obscured by ivy. Peering through the dusty glass, he saw Lena inside. The warehouse was vast, dimly lit by overhead industrial lights. In the center, a makeshift training area had been set up, complete with punching bags, martial arts mats, and a small firing range. Several figures moved within the space, men and women, all dressed in dark, functional clothing, engaged in intense combat training. Their movements were fluid, deadly, practiced. These were not common thugs. These were highly trained operatives, professionals. And then he saw him. The man who was barking orders, moving among them, his voice a low, gravelly growl. His back was to Jake, but there was an unmistakable authority in his posture, a cold, ruthless power that permeated the air. As the man turned, Jake's blood ran cold. It was Elias Thorne, Councilman Arthur Thorne's younger brother. Elias, a figure long shrouded in rumors of extreme violence and criminal ties, had disappeared from public life years ago after a series of brutal, unsolved assaults linked to his name. He was a phantom, spoken of only in whispers, believed to be long dead or in hiding. But here he was, alive, and clearly the brutal enforcer. Perhaps even the true field commander of the Crimson Hand. Lena was standing beside Elias, her expression grim, listening intently to his directives. It was clear she was an integral part of this inner circle, a key player in the Crimson Hand's violent operations, not just their financial dealings. Jake pulled back from the window, his mind racing. Elias Thorne, the brutal enforcer, brother of the seemingly untouchable Councilman Thorne. This was a nightmare. The leader of the Crimson Hand wasn't just a shadowy figure. He was directly connected to the city's political elite. The intertwining of legitimate power and illicit brutality was horrifyingly complete. He also realized something else. The training facility. The precise, deadly movements. It hinted at a level of organization and discipline that went beyond simple street crime. They were preparing for something. Something big. As he watched, Elias Thorne pulled Lena aside, their voices too low to distinguish. But Jake saw Elias gesture wildly, his face contorted in anger, pointing towards Lena's wrist. Lena recoiled slightly, then straightened, her jaw set. It was a heated argument, a rare glimpse of vulnerability from Lena, a crack in her polished facade. Then, Elias's hand moved, a lightning-fast, brutal backhand that struck Lena across the face, sending her stumbling. She caught herself, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and defiance. Jake felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a cult of power, built on fear and brutalization, even of its own members. The image of Lena's beautiful face, now marred by Elias's violence, sent a strange, conflicted ripple through him. She was his enemy, a symbol of the tragedy that had destroyed his family. But seeing her subjected to such brutality, it was a jarring, uncomfortable realization. Elias continued to berate her, his voice a guttural snarl, then stalked away, leaving Lena to compose herself. She stood there for a moment, her shoulders slumped, before slowly, deliberately, raising her hand to her wrist, touching the tattoo. It was a gesture of resignation, of silent acceptance of her fate. Jake knew he couldn't intervene. Not now. He was deep undercover, without backup. And this was an internal power struggle he couldn't afford to expose himself to. But the scene had revealed a crucial piece of information. Lena Volkov, despite her high rank, was not simply a willing participant. There was a deeper, more complex dynamic at play, a layer of coercion or control that he hadn't anticipated. He retreated from the warehouse, his mind buzzing with the new information. Elias Thorne was alive. He was the brutal arm of the Crimson Hand, and Councilman Arthur Thorne was the political brain, the one who leveraged legitimate power for illicit gain. The web was tighter, more dangerous than ever. And Lena Volkov, the woman with the tattoo, was caught somewhere in the middle, a pawn or a player in a game far more deadly than Jake had imagined. The stakes had just been raised exponentially, and Jake knew he had to be ready to step into the heart of the lion's den to uncover the full truth and finally get justice for his family. The sight of Elias Thorne striking Lena Volkov resonated deeply within Jake Riley. It was a jarring contradiction. Lena, the embodiment of the organization that had shattered his life, was also a victim of its brutal hierarchy. This unexpected complexity fueled a new layer of determination within Jake. He wasn't just chasing the ghosts of his past, he was uncovering a truth far uglier and more entrenched than he had ever imagined. The Crimson Hand wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was a structure of control, built on fear and coercion, even for those within its upper echelons. Jake's covert investigation intensified. He shifted his focus from merely observing Lena to understanding her vulnerability, her connection to Elias Thorne, and the internal dynamics of the Crimson Hand. He spent hours dissecting old records, cross-referencing names, and sifting through public data, all while maintaining his facade as a diligent patrol officer. He had to be cautious, knowing that Elias Thorne's return meant an escalation of danger. Elias was a ghost of a different kind, a brutal enforcer whose past actions had left a trail of broken lives. Sarah Jenkins, his lifeline to the unofficial intelligence network, fed him more crucial pieces. She confirmed that Elias Thorne had indeed disappeared years ago, presumed dead after a failed attempt to take over a rival criminal syndicate. His reappearance now signaled a major shift in the Crimson Hand's power structure. likely with Councilman Arthur Thorne as the strategic mastermind and Elias as the violent executor. Elias is the muscle. Jake. Sarah warned him over a secure line. He's unpredictable, ruthless, and he leaves nothing behind. If he's back, they're gearing up for something big. Something that requires pure, unadulterated force. Jake also discovered a crucial detail about Lena Volkov's past. She had been an orphan, raised in a series of neglectful foster homes, before mysteriously disappearing from the system in her late teens, only to re-emerge years later as a brilliant, enigmatic financial analyst at Sterling Capital Group. This provided a potential motive for her involvement, a possible point of leverage the Crimson Hand might have used against her. Was she coerced, or was she a willing participant, seeking power and belonging in a twisted family? His surveillance of Lena led him to another critical observation. She frequently visited a small, private cemetery on the outskirts of Metropolitan City, always alone, always at dusk. She would stand by a single, unmarked grave for extended periods, her posture somber, almost mournful. It was a stark contrast to her usual stoic demeanor, a glimpse into a hidden sorrow. Jake, always careful to remain unseen, felt a strange, unsettling empathy. This woman, his enemy, carried her own burden. One evening, while watching Lena at the cemetery, Jake noticed a sleek, unmarked black van parked discreetly a few blocks away. His police instincts flared. It wasn't a casual vehicle. It was a surveillance van, and he recognized the tinted windows, the subtle antennas. It was FBI. A cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline. The FBI was onto the Crimson Hand. This could be a breakthrough, or it could compromise everything. He knew he had to act, to find out what the feds knew, and how it impacted his own investigation. He couldn't risk them swooping in and destroying his years of meticulous work. Or worse, inadvertently alerting the Crimson Hand. He discreetly shadowed the FBI surveillance team. He observed their shift changes, their protocols, their blind spots. He learned that the lead agent was Agent Anya Sharma, a formidable, no-nonsense operative with a reputation for relentless pursuit of organized crime. Jake knew he had to establish contact with Agent Sharma, but how he couldn't just walk up to her. His own investigation was unofficial, off the books, a dangerous tightrope walk between duty and personal vendetta. He needed to find a way to approach her without revealing too much, too soon. He leveraged an old contact in the FBI's regional office, a former academy classmate, planting a discreet, anonymous tip about unusual activity related to Sterling Capital Group and a specific address in the waterfront district, an address he knew was a Crimson Hand safe house. He knew this would get Agent Sharma's attention, nudging her towards the heart of the syndicate without explicitly revealing his own involvement. His strategy worked, within days. Jake observed increased FBI presence around Sterling Capital and the waterfront district. Agent Sharma's team was clearly ramping up their investigation. The net was tightening. Then, the unexpected happened. Jake received an anonymous, untraceable message on his burner phone. "Meet me, midnight, Old Dock 7, come alone. Don't tell anyone." The message was terse, the number blocked. He knew it was Lena. No one else could have known his burner number. It was a risky proposition, a potential trap, but he couldn't refuse. This was his chance to confront her, to understand her motives, and to finally get answers. That night, under the cloak of a heavy fog rolling in from the harbor, Jake drove to Old Dock 7, a dilapidated, abandoned pier, known for its eerie silence and decaying structures. The air was thick with the smell of brine and rust. The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the rotting pilings. Lena Volkov was already there, a silhouette against the backdrop of the city lights. She stood by the edge of the pier, her back to him, her posture rigid. She turned as he approached. Her eyes, usually guarded, now held a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher: weariness, perhaps, or a desperate resolve. "You came," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You called," Jake replied, his hand instinctively going to his concealed weapon. He wasn't foolish enough to underestimate her, even if she seemed vulnerable. "Why?" Lena turned fully, facing him. The fog swirled around them, obscuring the world, creating a private, clandestine stage. I know who you are. Officer Riley, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I know about your family. About the fire. Jake felt a jolt. She knew. She had been investigating him. The game had just escalated. And I know about you, Ms. Volkov, about the Crimson Hand, about Elias Thorne, about Councilman Thorne. He let the names hang in the air. A silent challenge. And the tattoo. The one on your wrist. It connects you to my family's murder. Lena's eyes hardened, a flicker of pain crossing her face, quickly suppressed. It's not what you think, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. I didn't kill your family, Officer Riley. I wasn't even there. Then what are you? Jake demanded, stepping closer, his voice laced with the decade of pain and anger. A willing participant, a victim. Tell me. Lena hesitated, then sighed, a sound filled with profound weariness. I was a victim. Once. She looked at the tattoo on her wrist, her fingers tracing its outline, a gesture of deep, complex resignation. This isn't just a mark of loyalty, officer. It's a brand, a reminder of a debt I've been paying my entire life. She then told him a story, her voice low and steady, punctuated by the mournful cries of unseen gulls. A story of a desperate, orphaned girl, manipulated and trapped by Elias Thorne. The Crimson Hand had found her, exploited her intellect, trained her, and eventually forced her into their service. They controlled her through threats against the only family she had ever known, a distant relative. An elderly aunt Lena had never met, but Elias held as leverage. The tattoo, she revealed, was a binding ritual, a symbolic chains forged from a desperate promise she made to save her aunt, a promise that condemned her to a life of servitude. I am their financial architect, Lena confessed, her eyes meeting his, raw and vulnerable. I manage their illicit funds. I create the shell corporations, the offshore accounts. I made Thorne rich. I helped them infiltrate every level of this city's economy, but I never wanted any part of the violence. I despise what they do. And my family, Jake pressed, his voice tight with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Why them? Lena's gaze dropped. Your father, Mr. Riley, was a tenacious journalist. He was quietly investigating the Crimson Hand's early attempts to infiltrate the waterfront project. He was getting too close to Councilman Thorne's involvement. Elias chose to make an example, a brutal, unmistakable message to anyone else who dared to dig. Jake felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. It was worse than he imagined. His father, a man of integrity, had been murdered for pursuing the truth. The random arson was a lie. The tragedy was a cold, calculated act of terror. But why tell me now, Jake asked, his voice raw. Why risk everything? Lena looked out at the churning, foggy waters. Because it's ending. Officer Riley. The Crimson Hand is planning their biggest move yet. A massive land acquisition deal, worth billions, that will solidify their control over Metropolitan City for generations. It's a deal that involves the highest levels of power. Not just here, but potentially at the state level. She turned to face him, her eyes burning with a desperate urgency. And Elias, he's going to eliminate every single loose end, every witness, every potential threat, including me, and including you, Officer Riley, if you keep digging. She pulled a small encrypted thumb drive from her pocket. This contains everything. The real ledger, all of Thorne's illicit dealings, every single shell company, every payoff, every name, and it has the details of the master plan, the full scope of their final acquisition. Jake stared at the drive, his mind racing. This was it. The evidence he needed, the key to dismantling the Crimson Hand, but it was also a desperate plea, a dangerous proposition. Why give this to me, Jake asked, suspicion still warring with the overwhelming weight of the truth. Lena's gaze was unwavering, a desperate hope in her eyes. Because I want out. Officer Riley, I want to be free. And you're the only one who can stop them. The FBI is close, but they don't have the full picture. Not yet. You're inside. You understand how they operate, and you have a personal stake. We need to work together. A temporary, dangerous alliance. Jake looked at her. The woman with the tattoo, the symbol of his darkest nightmare. She was his enemy, yet she was offering him the path to justice, to closure. He saw the genuine desperation in her eyes, the years of quiet suffering, the desperate yearning for freedom. This wasn't a trick. This was a desperate gamble. You expect me to trust you? Jake asked, his voice flat. You don't have to trust me, Lena replied, her voice firm. Just trust the evidence, and trust that I want to see them fall as much as you do. Maybe even more. Because unlike you, Officer Riley, I don't have a badge to protect me. I only have this one chance. The fog swirled around them, momentarily obscuring their figures, making them mere silhouettes in the vast, unforgiving darkness. Jake held the thumb drive, its weight immense. He looked at Lena, at the tattoo on her wrist, a mark of her enslavement. But now, perhaps, a symbol of hope. The line between good and evil, between victim and perpetrator, blurred into an unsettling gray. He knew this alliance was risky, dangerous, but it was also his only shot. He was about to step into the heart of the Crimson Hand, not alone, but with the very woman who had inadvertently led him there. The path to justice was now intertwined with the very people who had once destroyed his life. The cold, salty air of Old Dock 7 swirled around Jake and Lena, the fog a living, breathing entity that obscured the city lights, leaving them isolated in a world of their own making. The weight of the tiny thumb drive in Jake's hand felt immense, a fragile key to unlocking a decade of buried pain and a city's pervasive corruption. Lena Volkov, the woman who bore the mark of his family's destruction, now stood before him as a desperate, unlikely ally. Her words, raw and unvarnished, had peeled back layers of his hardened skepticism, revealing a truth far more complex than simple villainy. You've been paying this debt for a long time, Lena, Jake said, his voice softer than he intended, the anger still there, but now laced with a strange, nascent understanding. How long have you been looking for a way out? Lena's gaze was fixed on the churning water, her voice a low murmur. Since the beginning, since I realized what they truly were. But they're everywhere. Officer Riley. Their reach is vast, and Elias, he ensures loyalty through fear and through leverage. My aunt, she's all I have left. And what about this master plan? Jake pressed, bringing them back to the immediate danger. What is it? Lena turned, her eyes now filled with a cold, strategic glint that Jake recognized from his own training. This was the brilliant financial mind, the strategist. The Metropolitan Renaissance Initiative isn't just a development project, Officer Riley. It's the final stage of their total control. They're using it to acquire every major strategic asset in the city, key transportation hubs, communication infrastructure, even portions of the public utility grid. Once complete, they won't just control the illicit economy. They'll control the very pulse of Metropolitan City. And the last piece of the puzzle is a vote in the City Council, set for next week, to finalize the acquisition of the historic waterfront properties, the last major piece of untainted public land. Jake's mind raced. The waterfront property. He remembered the old news reports, the original resistance to its development, then its sudden, quiet approval after the Metropolitan Renaissance Initiative gained traction. It was a perfect, almost poetic, culmination of their insidious plan. And the ledger, Jake asked, tapping the thumb drive. This has the names of the council members involved. And more, Lena confirmed. It has the names of their primary contacts in state government, the judges they have compromised, and the top brass in the police department who have been turning a blind eye for years. Arthur Thorne is the architect, the public face, but the true power, the one pulling the strings, is far more shadowy. Jake's gut twisted. The thought of compromised police officers, of his own colleagues, was a bitter pill. But it explained so much: the sudden closure of his family's case, the dismissals of legitimate leads, the constant dead ends. So, what's the plan? Jake asked, knowing they were on a ticking clock. How do we stop them? Lena exhaled slowly, the mist of her breath mingling with the fog. We use this, the ledger. We expose them. But we have to do it carefully. Elias is paranoid. He's already searching for the leak. He suspects everyone. She paused, a flicker of something raw in her eyes. And he's arranged a meeting, a final briefing before the council vote. All the key players will be there. Arthur Thorne, Elias, their top enforcers, and the council members they've bought. When and where, Jake asked, his voice sharp with focus. The old Hawthorne mansion, upstate. 3 nights from now. It's a private estate, heavily fortified, isolated, no cell service. They chose it because it's impossible to monitor without direct physical presence. Lena looked at him, her gaze unwavering. That's our window. We get in, we expose them, and we get out with the evidence. It's a one-shot deal. Jake knew the Hawthorne mansion. It was a sprawling Gothic estate, rumored to have hidden tunnels and secret rooms, a relic of a bygone era, a perfect stronghold for a clandestine organization. This was a suicide mission, but it was also the only way. You'll need to get me inside, Jake stated, his voice firm. As part of your security detail, or as a new recruit, something believable. Lena nodded. Elias will be suspicious of any new faces, but I can make it work. I'll tell him you're a former military operative I vetted personally, a ghost who understands discretion and brute force, someone desperate for a clean slate, a chance to make serious money without asking questions. Her eyes flickered to his police-issue boots, then back to his face. You'll have to sell it, Officer Riley. You'll have to become the kind of man they trust. A man like them. Jake felt a chilling realization. He would have to become a wolf to hunt wolves. He would have to shed his identity as a police officer, embrace the darkness he had fought against, and walk among the very people who had destroyed his family. But he knew, instinctively, that this was the only path to true justice. I'll need backup, Lena, Jake stated. The FBI knows about Thorne and Sterling Capital, Agent Sharma's team. We need to feed them this intel, prepare them for a raid. No, Lena said, her voice firm, resolute. Not yet. Elias will have eyes and ears everywhere. If the FBI moves too soon, they'll scatter. Or worse, they'll purge. The ledger has names within the FBI too. Low-level operatives they've compromised. We can't risk it. Not until we're inside. And we have definitive proof of their direct involvement in the master plan. We trigger the raid from within. That's the only way. Jake weighed her words. She was right. A premature move would be disastrous. This was a surgical strike, not a blunt instrument. And he was the surgeon. All right, Jake conceded, the weight of the decision settling heavily on him. We go in alone. We get the proof. Then we trigger the raid. But we need a contingency, a failsafe. If something goes wrong, if I can't get a signal out, how do I alert Agent Sharma? Lena thought for a moment, then looked at the thumb drive in his hand. This drive, it has a dead man's switch. If it's not accessed by a specific time, and if I don't input a code, a compressed file will be sent to a secure FBI server. It contains partial information, enough to trigger a full-scale raid, but not the full ledger. It's a last resort. It alerts them, but it protects the full scope of the information if we're compromised. Jake nodded. It was a calculated risk, a dangerous gambit, but the only one they had. Over the next 2 days, Jake and Lena worked in secret, meticulously planning their infiltration. Lena provided Jake with detailed blueprints of the Hawthorne mansion, its hidden passages, its security systems, and the patrol routes of Elias's elite security detail. She taught him the subtle hand signals, the coded phrases, the unwritten rules of the Crimson Hand's inner circle. Jake, in turn, honed his combat skills, his tactical knowledge, and his ability to blend into the shadows. He practiced the persona of Jax, a hardened, quiet mercenary, a man with no loyalties but to money and survival. He even had to get a small, temporary tattoo on his own wrist, a less detailed version of the Crimson Hand symbol, to sell his new identity. It was a bitter irony, but a necessary evil. The closer they got to the night of the operation, the more Jake's focus sharpened. The fear was still there, a cold undercurrent, but it was now overshadowed by an almost clinical determination. He was no longer just chasing ghosts. He was hunting them. And Lena Volkov, the woman he had once despised, had become his unexpected, invaluable guide through the labyrinth of his past. The night of the infiltration arrived, cloaked in a heavy, insistent rain that lashed against the city. It was a fitting backdrop for the darkness they were about to confront. Jake, dressed in tactical gear, his face grim, met Lena at a secluded rendezvous point miles from the Hawthorne mansion. Lena, too, was dressed in practical, dark clothing, her usual refined elegance replaced by a stark, dangerous efficiency. "Ready?" Jax Lena asked, her voice low, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them, only a cold, steely resolve. "As I'll ever be." "Lena," Jake replied, his hand instinctively going to the concealed pistol at his hip. He felt a grim satisfaction. This was it, the culmination of a decade of pain, of searching, of relentless pursuit. They drove in silence, the isolated road leading deeper into the forested hills. The Hawthorne mansion emerged from the darkness, a looming, imposing structure, its silhouette almost menacing against the stormy sky. Security cameras dotted the perimeter, but Lena had provided the blind spots, the brief windows of opportunity. They breached the outer perimeter, moving with practiced stealth. Lena leading the way through a rarely used service entrance, a secret tunnel known only to the highest echelons of the Crimson Hand. The air inside the tunnel was stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. As they emerged into the mansion's dimly lit interior, Jake felt a surge of adrenaline. They were inside, the heart of the beast. He could hear muffled voices from a room nearby, the murmur of a clandestine meeting, the master plan, the end of the Crimson Hand, and his chance at justice. Lena moved silently, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors. She indicated a large, ornate door at the end of the hall. "That's it," she whispered. "The main meeting room. All of them. Arthur Thorne, Elias, the council members. This is where they'll finalize the deal." Jake nodded, his hand on his weapon. This was the point of no return. He looked at Lena, at the tattoo on her wrist, a symbol of their shared, painful past. But now, perhaps, a symbol of their unexpected, desperate alliance. The line between predator and prey had blurred completely. The hunter and the hunted were now one, facing a common enemy, ready to unravel a decade of darkness and finally bring justice to Metropolitan City. The stale, musty air of the Hawthorne mansion clung to Jake and Lena as they moved like phantoms through its darkened, opulent corridors. The muffled voices from the main meeting room grew clearer, a low, menacing hum of power and conspiracy. This was it, the culmination of a decade of hidden pain and relentless pursuit. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and grim resolve. Lena led him to a discreet service door, almost invisible against the ornate wallpaper. It was cleverly disguised, leading to a narrow, dusty passage that ran behind the meeting room's wall, soundproofed. "Mostly," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "But there are vents. We can hear them. And through the peephole, we can see." They slipped inside the cramped space. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and the fainter aroma of cigar smoke from the other side of the wall. Jake knelt, his eye pressed to a small, almost undetectable pinhole in the wall, strategically placed at eye level. The scene that unfolded before him was chillingly mundane in its villainy. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by men in expensive suits, their faces a mix of Metropolitan City's elite. Councilman Arthur Thorne sat at the head, his normally composed features now alive with a predatory triumph. Beside him, Elias Thorne, a cold, brutal presence, surveyed the room with an almost bored arrogance. Among the attendees, Jake recognized several city council members, a prominent real estate mogul, and even a high-ranking police captain from the narcotics division, a man Jake had once respected. The sight twisted his gut. The corruption truly reached everywhere. On the table, blueprints and legal documents were spread out, detailing the sprawling Metropolitan Renaissance Initiative. A large map of the city lay open, marked with red circles and lines that crisscrossed over key public lands, including the very waterfront properties Lena had described. This was the master plan, laid bare. "Gentlemen," Arthur Thorne's voice, smooth and confident, filled the space, barely muffled by the wall. The final vote on the waterfront acquisition is set for Friday. Our investments in City Hall have ensured a unanimous decision. Once those properties are ours, the Crimson Hand will have complete control over Metropolitan City's future. Every major artery, every essential service, every prime piece of land will be under our umbrella. A round of congratulatory murmurs rippled through the room. Elias Thorne cracked a rare, chilling smile. Lena, peering through another peephole, nudged Jake. "The ledger," she whispered. "They always keep it safe. But Arthur will want to show it off, to gloat." Just as she predicted, Arthur Thorne produced a sleek, leather-bound ledger from a hidden compartment beneath the table. He laid it open on the table, his finger tracing lines of meticulously recorded data. "This, gentlemen," he declared, his voice swelling with pride, "is our true strength. Every payment, every compromised official, every asset, from district attorneys to state senators, even a few federal contacts, though they are less reliable." Jake felt a surge of rage. His family's destruction was just a footnote in this meticulously documented ledger of corruption. He focused on the ledger, his mind working furiously. He needed to get visual confirmation, clear, undeniable proof. He discreetly activated the miniature, high-resolution camera he had hidden in a button on his jacket, angling it as best he could through the peephole, hoping to capture the ledger's contents. As Arthur Thorne continued his monologue, Elias Thorne's eyes, restless and predatory, swept over the room. He paused, his gaze seeming to fix on the very wall behind which Jake and Lena were hidden. A flicker of suspicion crossed his face. What was that noise? Elias suddenly barked, his voice cutting through Arthur's speech, sharp and immediate. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Elias. Arthur Thorne frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "I heard something," Elias insisted, slowly rising from his chair. His eyes narrowed, scanning the wall. He began to walk towards the service door, his movements fluid, deadly. Jake's heart hammered. He was made. Or Elias was just being paranoid. Either way, they were in immediate danger. He instinctively reached for his suppressed pistol, preparing for the inevitable. Lena, ever quick thinking, reacted instantly. She slammed her palm against a loose floorboard in the narrow passage, creating a loud, distinct creak. The sound was exaggerated, designed to draw attention, but away from their precise location. Elias froze, his attention now fixed on the faint noise emanating from a different section of the wall, further down the corridor. "Someone's out there," he roared, drawing a silenced pistol from his waistband. "Get to the perimeter. Secure the mansion." Chaos erupted in the meeting room. Council members scrambled, their faces paling. Arthur Thorne's composure cracked, his eyes wide with fear. The other enforcers in the room drew their weapons, moving with practiced efficiency towards the sound. This was their chance. "Now," Lena hissed, pushing Jake towards a different, smaller, hidden panel in the wall. This one led directly into a storage room adjacent to the meeting hall. "Through here. Get the ledger." Jake didn't hesitate. He burst through the hidden panel, rolling into the storage room, the familiar scent of old paper and dust filling his nostrils. He was immediately in the main hall. He could hear the frantic shouts of Elias Thorne's men as they rushed towards the direction of the decoy noise. He sprinted towards the meeting room, his eyes fixed on the open door. The council members were still scrambling, but Arthur Thorne, ever the calculating one, was making a move towards the ledger, clearly intending to secure or destroy it. "Freeze!" Jake roared, his voice cutting through the panic. He burst into the meeting room, his suppressed pistol raised, aimed directly at Arthur Thorne. His identity as a police officer was now clear, his cover irrevocably blown. Arthur Thorne froze, his hand inches from the ledger. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in furious recognition. "You, the officer from the traffic stop." "How?" Elias Thorne, alerted by Jake's shout, whirled around from the main hall, his face contorted in a snarl of rage. He saw Jake, uniform visible beneath his tactical vest, pistol raised, the cop. "He's the leak," Elias screamed, firing his own silenced pistol. Jake dove for cover. the bullet impacting the wall where he had just stood. The room erupted into a symphony of gunshots and terrified screams. The council members scrambled for cover, diving under tables, their faces a mixture of betrayal and terror. Jake returned fire, aiming for non-lethal targets, trying to neutralize the threat without killing. He was a police officer, even in the heart of this war. He disabled one of Thorne's bodyguards with a shot to the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Arthur Thorne, meanwhile, used the chaos to grab the ledger, trying to shove it into his briefcase. Jake knew he couldn't let that happen. That ledger was the key. Lena, moving with astonishing speed and grace, launched herself into the room from the service door Jake had come through. She didn't have a weapon, but she moved with the precision of a trained combatant. She tackled Arthur Thorne, sending him and the briefcase crashing to the floor, the ledger sliding across the polished wood. "Get the ledger," Lena yelled, struggling with the surprisingly strong Arthur Thorne. Jake, exchanging fire with Elias, saw his opportunity. He sprinted, dodging bullets, towards the fallen ledger. Elias, consumed by a brutal, personal rage, shifted his aim, firing directly at Lena. "No!" Jake roared. He fired a precise shot, hitting Elias's gun hand, sending the pistol flying. Elias howled in pain, his focus momentarily broken. Jake reached the ledger, scooping it up. The leather felt cool and heavy in his hand. He had it. He had the proof. But the fight wasn't over. Elias, despite his injured hand, charged at Jake, his eyes blazing with pure, unadulterated hatred. He was a force of nature, a man driven by primal violence. Jake braced himself for the hand-to-hand combat, knowing this would be the true test. Elias launched himself at Jake, a flurry of brutal punches and kicks. Jake met him, blow for blow, relying on his training, his discipline, and the burning desire for justice that fueled him. This wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. For Lily, for his parents, for every life Elias Thorne had shattered. Meanwhile, Lena was struggling with Arthur Thorne, who, despite his age, was surprisingly strong in his desperation to reclaim the ledger. He snarled at Lena. "You little traitor, I made you, I gave you everything." Lena, fueled by years of silent rage and resentment, fought back with a ferocity Jake hadn't seen. She was no longer just a victim, she was a survivor, fighting for her freedom. She landed a series of precise, debilitating strikes, leveraging her agility against Thorne's brute strength. The sound of approaching sirens, now loud and unmistakable, filled the air outside the mansion. The FBI, alerted by Lena's dead man's switch, was on their way. The net was tightening. Elias, seeing the flashing lights through the mansion windows, roared in frustration. He launched one final, desperate attack at Jake, a wild, brutal charge. Jake dodged, countering with a swift, powerful kick to Elias's solar plexus, sending him crashing into the wall. Elias slumped, gasping for air, momentarily incapacitated. Just as the main doors of the mansion burst open and Agent Anya Sharma, followed by a squad of heavily armed FBI agents, stormed in. Jake stood over Elias, the ledger clutched in his hand. Lena, bruised but triumphant, stood over Arthur Thorne, who lay groaning, defeated. Agent Sharma's eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over the chaotic scene, landing finally on Jake. She saw the police tactical vest, the pistol, the grim determination on his face. She saw Lena, battered but defiant, and she saw the ledger in Jake's hand. "Officer Riley," Agent Sharma stated, her voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. "You were supposed to be our ghost, not the one-man invasion force." Jake, his chest heaving, offered a grim, weary smile. "Plans change, Agent Sharma. Sometimes, the ghosts have to fight their own battles." He extended the ledger to her. "This is it. Everything. The Crimson Hand, from top to bottom, and the names of every compromised official in Metropolitan City." The agents moved swiftly, securing the area, apprehending Elias and Arthur Thorne, along with the terrified council members and remaining enforcers. The silent, meticulous work of years had finally come to fruition in a storm of violence and revelation. The Crimson Hand, once a phantom of Metropolitan City, was now exposed, its leaders captured, its secrets laid bare, and Jake Riley, the officer haunted by the past, had finally found his justice. The early morning light, filtered through the stained glass windows of the Hawthorne mansion, cast fractured patterns across the scene of controlled chaos. FBI agents, led by Agent Anya Sharma, moved with swift, professional efficiency, securing evidence, processing suspects, and systematically dismantling the operational hub of the Crimson Hand. The air, once thick with the tension of clandestine plotting, now hummed with the authoritative buzz of law enforcement. Jake stood slightly apart from the organized flurry, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving him with a profound sense of exhaustion. His muscles ached. His mind felt strangely clear. He watched as Elias Thorne, bound and grim-faced, was led out by two federal agents. His eyes met Jake's for a fleeting moment, a spark of undiluted hatred in their depths. Jake simply held his gaze, a quiet triumph in his own. Arthur Thorne, pale and visibly shaken, was next. The once impeccable councilman now looked like a ghost, his facade of respectability utterly shattered. He offered no resistance, his eyes vacant, fixed on a future he could no longer control. Agent Sharma approached Jake, her expression a mixture of professional acknowledgement and lingering surprise. She took the ledger from him, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "This is comprehensive, Officer Riley," she stated, her voice tight with revelation. "More than we could have hoped for. This will bring down a lot of dominoes, not just the Crimson Hand." Lena Volkov was instrumental, Jake said, nodding towards Lena, who was being attended to by a medic, her bruises stark against her pale skin. She had refused medical attention until all the evidence was secured. Sharma looked at Lena, a complicated expression on her face. A difficult call, having an informant so deeply embedded, especially one with such unique ties. "She chose to fight," Jake stated simply, his gaze meeting Lena's across the room. There was no animosity in his eyes now, only a recognition of shared struggle. The tattoo on her wrist, once a symbol of his nightmare, now seemed to represent a painful journey towards freedom. The aftermath of the raid was a whirlwind of debriefings, legal proceedings, and shocking revelations. The ledger, meticulously detailed by Lena, provided the irrefutable evidence needed to dismantle the Crimson Hand from its roots to its highest branches. The names within it sent shockwaves through Metropolitan City. High-ranking police officials were arrested, their betrayals exposed. City council members, judges, and prominent businessmen faced indictments, their careers and reputations shattered. The Metropolitan Renaissance Initiative, once a beacon of urban renewal, was now seen for what it truly was, a colossal money-laundering scheme and a vehicle for absolute control. The story dominated national headlines. "Metropolitan City's shadow government exposed," screamed one banner. "The Crimson Hand's reign of terror ends," declared another. The public was outraged, shocked, and slowly, cautiously, relieved. Jake, still officially on administrative leave, was whisked away to a secure location for extensive debriefing by a joint task force of the FBI and Internal Affairs. He recounted every detail, every dangerous encounter, every piece of intelligence Lena had provided. His testimony was critical, painted with the raw truth of his undercover experience. He didn't embellish or seek praise. He simply presented the facts, the grim reality he had navigated for weeks. Lena Volkov. After intense negotiations orchestrated by Agent Sharma and a dedicated legal team, entered a witness protection program. Her testimony, corroborating the ledger and Jake's accounts, was devastatingly effective in court. She recounted her forced servitude, the manipulation, and the constant threats against her aunt, revealing the psychological torture and coercion that had kept her bound to the Crimson Hand. Her aunt, a frail, elderly woman, was quietly relocated and provided with care. Lena, no longer under the shadow of Elias Thorne, began the long process of healing and rebuilding a life free from the Crimson Hand's grip. The tattoo, she later confided to Jake, would be removed, a final severance from her painful past. Commander Peterson, who had taken over leadership of the Metropolitan City Police Department after the previous chief's resignation due to scandal, presided over Jake's official reinstatement. There was no public ceremony, just a quiet, solemn moment in Peterson's office. "Officer Riley," Peterson said, his voice grave. but with a deep, unwavering respect. You chose the path of extreme risk. You went against protocol. But you did it for justice, for the city, and for your family. You honored your badge in a way few could. We're rebuilding this department from the ground up, and we need officers like you at the forefront. Jake, his badge gleaming on his chest, felt a profound sense of closure. The ghosts of his past, the haunting images of the fire, finally began to recede. He had brought down the organization that had stolen his family. He had found the answers he had desperately sought. The weight he had carried for a decade began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. He returned to his patrol duties, but he was a changed man. The intense experience had forged him into a more nuanced, perceptive officer. He saw the city's shadows with greater clarity, understood the subtle undercurrents of power and despair. He became a silent mentor to younger officers, sharing his experiences, teaching them the importance of vigilance, integrity, and the hidden complexities of the justice system. He understood that true justice wasn't always about handcuffs and courtrooms. Sometimes, it was about infiltrating the darkness, understanding its motives, and breaking its chains from within. Metropolitan City, scarred but resilient, slowly began to heal. The cleanup was immense, the political landscape reshaped, but a new era of transparency and accountability began to emerge. The fear that had once permeated the city's underbelly began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. Jake continued to visit the unmarked grave at the cemetery, a quiet ritual. It was no longer a place of raw grief, but of quiet remembrance and a silent promise fulfilled. His family's memory was honored, their lives not in vain. The tattoo, once a symbol of terror, had led him to the truth, to a profound understanding of sacrifice, and to a new beginning. Officer Jake Riley, the ghost hunter, had finally found his peace, becoming a vigilant guardian of the city, forever aware that while the darkness might retreat, it always left its mark, and eternal vigilance was the price of true justice.